So, let me set the stage here. I'm Alex, 27, and my wife Rachel is 25. We've been together for several years now and recently tied the knot just 3 months ago. From my point of view, things have been pretty good overall. Nothing unusual. Sure, we've had our ups and downs, but who doesn't, right? I thought we were doing okay. But last night, something happened that threw me for a loop. I wasn't snooping or trying to eavesdrop, but as I walked by our bedroom, I heard Rachel talking on the phone. I hadn't planned on listening in, but you know how you catch snippets of conversation sometimes? Well, this was one of those moments, and it's been stuck in my head ever since. Rachel was on the phone with one of her closest friends, from what I could tell. The tone was different, serious, like the kind of conversation you have when you're venting about life. I was about to keep walking, but then I heard my name, and that stopped me cold. I mean, who wouldn't pause when they hear their name being brought up in a private talk? Curiosity got the best of me. And then she said it. Don't just settle for anyone. That was my mistake with Alex. It felt like a punch to the gut. She went on. He was kind of my last option, and now here we are. I was stunned. My own wife, someone I thought was genuinely happy with me, was telling her friend that I was her last option. I just stood there frozen. I couldn't believe it. How do you even start to process something like that? The first thought that came to my mind was to barge in and confront her. But something held me back. Maybe I was in shock, or maybe I just didn't want to hear more. Either way, I just turned around and left. The rest of the night, I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to keep things normal around Rachel, but every time I looked at her, those words echoed in my mind. The last option. It was like they'd been burned into my brain. All night, I couldn't help but replay the conversation over and over. Part of me wanted to believe that I'd misheard, or that there was some kind of misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard. There was no twisting those words into something else. Thinking back, I hadn't noticed any signs of this before. Rachel seemed happy, or at least content. Sure, we'd had a few arguments here and there, but nothing serious enough to make me think she felt trapped or unhappy. It's not like anyone forced her into this marriage. We'd been together for a while before we got married, talking about the future, our goals, and even kids someday. Everything felt real. Or so I thought. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind started spiraling. What if she'd always felt this way, but just never said anything? Every "I love you" suddenly felt questionable. Was it all just her going through the motions? I felt like an idiot, wondering if all the times I thought we were happy were just an act on her part. And then another thought hit me, and it made my stomach turn. What if there was someone else? I mean, she mentioned settling for me, right? Who's to say there wasn't someone else she really wanted to be with? Someone she's still thinking about? By morning, I was mentally drained. Rachel woke up looking cheerful, like nothing was wrong, while I was a mess. I couldn't bring myself to confront her just yet. I needed time to figure out what to say and how to handle it. But every moment I stayed quiet felt like I was suffocating. Throughout the day, I couldn't help but watch her, looking for signs. Was she texting someone else? Did she seem distant? Every move she made felt suspicious. I didn't want to feel paranoid, but how could I not? Hearing your partner say you were their last choice messes with your head in ways you don't expect. At one point, I even thought about talking to a friend about it, but then I felt embarrassed. What would I even say? Hey, I overheard my wife say I was her last option. What should I do? It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad TV drama. Besides, I didn't want to make Rachel look bad to my friends if this turned out to be something we could work through. As the day went on, though, I realized I couldn't just ignore this. It was too big to brush under the rug. The anxiety kept building, and I knew that eventually I would have to bring it up with Rachel. But the fear of what I might hear was almost too much to bear. What if she admitted everything? What if she confirmed all my worst fears? By evening, I'd made up my mind. After dinner, I casually mentioned that we should talk later. She looked a little surprised, but nodded. Little did she know that conversation was about to change everything. After overhearing Rachel's words, my mind was a mess. I couldn't shake off what I'd heard, no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it. The next day, everything between us felt different. I started noticing little things I'd never thought twice about before, and now they all seemed suspicious. Or maybe I just didn't want to see them for what they were. That morning, as we were having breakfast, I couldn't help but watch her closely. She was scrolling through her phone like she does every morning, but there was something different. Every few seconds I'd see her type something, then delete it, then retype it. My gut was twisting, and before I could stop myself, I asked, "Who are you texting?" Rachel looked up, startled, as if I'd caught her doing something she wasn't supposed to. She hesitated just a beat too long before saying, "Oh, just a friend." Her voice sounded a little too casual, and she added, "You don't know her." Then she quickly went back to her phone. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't have bothered me. But after last night, everything felt like a red flag. I didn't press her, though. I just nodded, trying to act like it didn't bother me. But it did. The rest of the day, I kept replaying her words from the night before. Was she texting that same friend she'd talked to on the phone? Or was it someone else entirely? My mind was spinning, and I couldn't seem to get a grip on it. It was like every tiny action felt like a clue in some twisted puzzle. What if there was someone else? What if I was just the fallback? Later that afternoon, I caught her again on her phone. This time she was smiling at the screen. But it wasn't the kind of smile you give when you're reading a funny meme. It felt different, a little too warm. I tried to sound casual, but there was an edge to my voice as I asked, "What's so funny?" Rachel looked up, startled again, and quickly locked her phone. "Oh, nothing," she said, brushing it off. "Just a meme." She tried to sound natural, but I could tell she didn't want me asking any more questions. And just like that, my suspicion grew stronger. Was she hiding something? Or was I letting my paranoia get the best of me? As the day went on, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I hated that I was turning into this paranoid guy, second-guessing every little thing she said or did. But after hearing her say she'd settled for me, how could I not? Every glance at her felt like I was analysing her for clues, trying to figure out if she was as checked out of this marriage as I feared. That night, we settled down on the couch to watch a show together. She leaned over, resting her head on my shoulder. It felt nice, but it also felt wrong. How could she be so affectionate after saying those things? Was she just pretending? Was this all part of some act to keep up appearances? I wanted to bring it up, to just say something then and there, but I couldn't find the words. What if I was making a mountain out of a molehill? What if I was blowing things out of proportion? I wanted to believe that maybe I'd misheard her or that she'd meant something different. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I kept hearing her voice in my head. Alex was my last option, Dot. Those words had weight. They felt real. And the more I thought about it, the harder it became to ignore. It wasn't just what she'd said. It was how she'd said it. There wasn't any hint of hesitation or regret. It was like she genuinely believed it. By the end of the day, I was completely drained. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, second-guessing everything she did and feeling like I was the only one holding on to this marriage. But I also knew that if I didn't confront her, I'd end up losing my mind. That night, as we got ready for bed, Rachel seemed completely at ease. She kissed me goodnight, rolled over, and was asleep within minutes. Meanwhile, I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. Had she always felt this way? Were there signs I'd missed? Or was she comparing me to someone else? Maybe someone she'd truly wanted? The idea of being someone's fallback, the person they settle for when they can't have what they really want, was enough to make me feel sick. I lay awake for hours, my mind racing, until finally I decided that I couldn't take it anymore. I had to talk to her. Even if it shattered everything, I needed answers. The next morning, I woke up feeling more determined than I'd felt in days. Rachel was still asleep, curled up on her side of the bed, looking peaceful and carefree. But I knew that the moment she woke up, everything was going to change. As soon as she was up and we'd finished breakfast, I took a deep breath and decided to just go for it. "Rachel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk, Dot." She looked up from her phone, surprised, but she didn't say anything. I motioned for us to sit down in the living room. As we sat on the couch, the tension between us felt thick and heavy, like we were both bracing for impact. I could tell she had no idea what was coming, but her curiosity was mixed with concern. "Look," I started, struggling to keep my voice calm. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, Dot." She nodded, still silent, her eyes fixed on me. I took another deep breath and just said it. "The other night, I overheard you talking on the phone. You said you'd settled for me. That was your last option, Dot." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't say anything. It was like time had frozen, and I was just sitting there waiting for the worst. Finally, she let out a nervous laugh, but it was forced. "Wait, you heard that?" she asked, her voice shaky, Dot. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I heard everything, Dot." She looked down, fiddling with her hands, avoiding my gaze. "Alex, I didn't mean it like that," she finally said. "I was just venting. It was a stupid thing to say." "Stupid?" I repeated, feeling a surge of frustration. "Rachel, you said I was your last option. That's not just stupid. That's crushing, Dot." She sighed, rubbing her temples as if she were trying to figure out the right words. "I was just feeling stressed, okay? It just came out wrong, Dot. It just came out wrong." I shot back, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "Those words don't just come out of nowhere, Rachel. You don't just casually say that you settled for your husband unless there's some truth behind it, Dot." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt and something I couldn't quite place. "It's not like that, Alex. I was just venting. I don't know what came over me, Dot, but why?" I asked, my voice softening, though the hurt was still there. "Why did it have to be about us? About you settling for me?" She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know," she whispered. And those words hit me harder than I could have imagined, Dot. "You don't know?" I echoed, barely able to keep my voice steady. "What does that even mean?" Rachel's words hit me like a ton of bricks. "I don't know." It was such a small phrase, but the weight of it felt massive. How could she not know? Here I was, committed to this marriage, thinking we were in it together, and she couldn't even tell me if she wanted this or not. I sat there, barely able to hold back my frustration, waiting for her to say something, anything that would make this make sense. But she just kept looking down, avoiding my eyes, like she didn't even know how to explain it herself. Finally, she let out a long sigh, her voice barely a whisper. "I love you, Alex, but sometimes I just don't know if I made the right choice, Dot." Those words felt like knives. "Not the right choice? Then why did you marry me?" My voice was shaking and I knew I was on the edge of losing my temper, but I couldn't help it. I needed answers. "Why go through with this if you're not even sure you want to be here?" She looked up at me and I could see the tears in her eyes. But that didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made me angrier. "I thought getting married would help," she admitted. "I thought it would make everything clearer, but now I just feel more lost." Lost. That's how she described it. Lost. I'd been building this life with her, thinking we were on the same path, and here she was, telling me she didn't even know if she wanted to be on it. I leaned back on the couch, trying to process everything she was saying. "So what now?" I finally asked, my voice hollow. "Are we supposed to just pretend like this conversation never happened? Are we just supposed to keep going like nothing's wrong?" Rachel wiped her eyes, sniffling. "I don't know," she whispered again, and the frustration boiling inside me reached a breaking point. Dot. "You keep saying that," I snapped. "I don't know. That's all I'm hearing from you. Do you even want to be in this marriage? Because right now it feels like you're already halfway out the door, Dot." She bit her lip, looking like she was trying to hold back more tears. "I don't want to hurt you, Alex," she said softly. "But I feel like I rushed into this. I thought I was ready, but maybe I wasn't." Ran a hand over my face, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. "So, what am I supposed to do with that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Am I supposed to just sit here, waiting for you to figure out whether or not you want to be with me?" She looked away, her silence answering for her. I didn't need her to say anything to know what that meant. After a long, heavy pause, She finally spoke up, her voice so soft I could barely hear her. Maybe we need some space just for a little while, to figure things out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Space? I repeated, almost laughing at the irony of it. We've been living in the same house, but we've been miles apart for days now. What difference would more space make? She didn't have an answer, and honestly, neither did I. We were stuck in this weird limbo, both of us feeling the weight of everything but too afraid to fully confront it. That night, we went to bed, lying side by side but feeling like there was an ocean between us. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was any way to fix this, or if this was the beginning of the end. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. Rachel's indecision, her "I don't know" about our marriage, was like a poison slowly eating away at me. If I didn't do something soon, it was going to destroy me. That morning, I got up early and sat in the living room trying to figure out my next move. Rachel was still asleep, curled up on her side of the bed, looking peaceful. Like none of this was weighing on her the way it was on me. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe she'd already checked out, and I was the one still holding on to something that wasn't even there anymore. I spent the day gathering my thoughts, trying to decide what I was going to say. By the time evening rolled around, I knew I couldn't keep putting this off. I had to bring it up again, no matter how hard it was. After dinner, I took a deep breath and looked at her across the table. "Rachel," I said, my voice calm but firm. "We need to figure this out. I can't keep living in this in-between state, wondering if you're really in this with me or not. She looked up from her plate, her expression a mix of guilt and sadness. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too, and I don't know if I can give you the answer you're looking for." I nodded, already expecting that answer but still feeling the sting of it. "Then maybe it's best if we go our separate ways," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I love you, Rachel, but I can't be in a marriage where I'm not someone's first choice. I deserve more than that. She looked down, tears filling her eyes, and for a moment I felt a pang of regret. But I knew deep down that this was the right decision. Staying together out of fear or guilt wasn't fair to either of us. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," I said, my voice softer now, "but sometimes the best thing we can do is let go. We sat there in silence, both of us trying to process what was happening. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. But it was my life, and I had to own it. After that conversation, everything changed. It was like a weight had been lifted. But it wasn't the kind of relief you feel when things are fixed. It was more like a dull, aching acceptance. Rachel and I stopped pretending. We both knew this was the end. The next few days were rough. We moved through the house like ghosts, barely talking. Every interaction felt heavy, like we both knew there wasn't much left to say. We started making plans to separate, going over who would keep what, and the little things that felt almost trivial compared to what was really happening. But even those small steps made it feel more real, like we were both finally accepting the reality we'd been avoiding. I spent a lot of time alone trying to process it all. It was painful, sure, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I deserved better. I deserved someone who would choose me first, without hesitation. And if Rachel couldn't be that person, then it was better for both of us to move on, painful as that truth was. A few days later, I was packing up some of my things when Rachel came into the room. She looked hesitant, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure if she should. Finally, she spoke up, her voice soft and almost broken. "Alex, I hope you find someone who makes you happy, someone who can be everything you need." I looked at her, feeling a tightness in my chest, but I managed to nod. "I hope you find that too, Rachel." There wasn't much more to say. No dramatic goodbye, no long speeches, just two people realizing that sometimes love isn't enough and that it's okay to let go. After she moved out, I focused on rebuilding my life. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in a while, threw myself into my work and tried to remember who I was outside of this marriage. It wasn't easy. There were days when I missed her, days when it hurt so much that it felt like a physical ache. But deep down, I knew this was the right path. Slowly, the hurt started to fade, and I found a kind of peace in the decision we'd made. About a month later, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. I'd settled into a routine, built a life for myself, one that felt grounded, even if it was still a little lonely. But then, one day, I was hanging out with a friend, just catching up over drinks, when he casually dropped a bombshell. "Hey, did you know Rachel's seeing someone?" He asked like it was no big deal. I nearly choked on my drink. "Wait, already?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, it felt like the ground had shifted under me. He looked a bit uncomfortable, like he wished he hadn't said anything. "Yeah, I saw her the other day at a coffee shop with this guy. They looked pretty close. Hearing that hit me harder than I expected. I mean, I knew we were done, but hearing that she'd already moved on, and so quickly, was a punch to the gut. The paperwork hadn't even been finalized, and here she was, moving on like our marriage had meant nothing. I tried to play it cool, to act like it didn't bother me. "Do you know who the guy is?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. My friend hesitated. "I think it's that guy she used to talk about before you two got married. You know, the one she had some history with Dot." And just like that, everything clicked. The constant texting, her weird behavior those last few weeks. It wasn't just her being distant. She'd been talking to this guy even before we'd decided to split. She was already halfway out the door, and I'd been too blind to see it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I replayed every moment of those last few weeks together, every time she was on her phone, every time she brushed off my questions. It all made sense now. She wasn't just distant, she was already checked out, already focused on someone else. The next morning, I decided I needed closure. I needed to hear it from her to understand why she couldn't just be honest with me. So I messaged her, asking if we could meet up. She agreed, and we met at a park nearby. Seeing her again felt strange. She looked nervous, like she knew what was coming. But I stayed calm, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Rachel," I started, keeping my voice steady. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. She nodded but didn't say anything. She just waited for me to go on. "I heard you've been seeing someone," I said, watching her reaction. "Is it true?" She blinked, surprised for a second, then looked away. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I've been seeing someone." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Is it the same guy you were talking to before we split?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it from her. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it's him." I felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over me. "So, you were talking to him this whole time, even when we were still trying to figure things out?" She looked down, guilt written all over her face. "I didn't plan for it to happen like this," she said, her voice breaking. "We started talking again, and it felt right. Right," I repeated, bitterness creeping into my voice. "Rachel, we were still married. We were supposed to be working on us, and you were already moving on with someone else. She started to cry, covering her face with her hands, but I didn't feel sympathy. I felt numb. "If you were talking to him the whole time, why didn't you just tell me? Why drag this out?" "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had." I stood up, feeling strangely calm. "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You managed to do that anyway. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Alex," she whispered, "give me another chance. I know I made a mistake, but can't we try to fix things?" I shook my head. "Rachel, you didn't love me. You loved the idea of not being alone. I can't be with someone who only comes back when things don't work out with someone else. She tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I still love you. I realize now that you were the best thing that ever happened to me." I sighed, looking at her with a mixture of sadness and finality. "It's too late, Rachel. I've moved on, and you need to do the same. I deserve someone who chooses me first, not someone who settles or comes back when things fall apart. Her face crumpled, and she started crying again. But I didn't feel sorry for her. This was her mess, not mine. "I'm sorry, Rachel," I said softly, "but we're done. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her there in tears. As I left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt free. Rachel's betrayal had been a painful chapter in my life, but now it was finally closed. Karma had played its part, and I was ready to move forward, without looking back. Story 2. Years ago, my parents stopped talking to me. It's more difficult than ever for them to bond now. It seemed like I had to tread carefully every day when I was living at my parents' place. I soon discovered as a child that everything I did was being watched closely. The man, my dad, had a strange fixation with control. He didn't care how absurd his restrictions sounded. He would tell me who I could talk to, where I should go, and what to dress. If he made a wrong decision, it was awful, and I had best accept it, unless I wanted a big fight or worse, a penalty. My mother, however, is another matter entirely. She wasn't quite as bad as he was, but since she never defended me, she may as well have been. Not once. She simply nodded in agreement with anything my dad said. She would constantly urge me that I should follow his wishes since he was the expert. She would quickly add, "It's for your own good," and it was meant to stop there. The problem is that it wasn't at all for my benefit. She didn't want to upset him, and he was just on a power trip. There was a girl in my class who had been hanging around with Moore when I was around 14. We strolled to classes together and chatted over lunch. Normal friendship stuff, you know. When my dad learned about it, he somehow interpreted that to indicate that I was dating her, or that I was intending to date her, or whatever other wild notions he had. With his usual solemn expression, he sat me down and began to lecture me about how I should not be playing about. I attempted to clarify that we were only pals. He became even more irate and claimed to be fully aware of the activities of children my age. To be honest, I was afraid. He continued to claim that he would make sure I regretted having a relationship if I ever considered it. But the shouting wasn't the only thing. He took it quite seriously. I didn't think I could stand up for myself. I simply waited for him to finish while I sat there in silence. Immediately after, my mother entered, adding to the embarrassment rather than calming him down. After giving me a thorough examination, she informed me that I was embarrassing the family and that I was too young to be acting in such a manner. Yes, it's a disgrace to have a buddy. I was dealing with a sort of warped reasoning like that. For me, the event marked a sea change. I recall trying to keep my composure and thinking, I've got to get out of here someday, as I went to my room afterwards. I began to count down the years until I could legally leave at that point, seeing each birthday and significant event as a step toward my eventual freedom. It wasn't like I was a child being ordered to do my chores or grounded. This was real control and intimidation. I felt like I had no control over my own life since they were so focused on keeping me in line. My dad also gave off the impression that he was a detective who was constantly on guard. He would haphazardly go through my belongings for any indication that I was disobeying his regulations. He would look through my school notebook, feigning to be checking my work, and if he discovered something he didn't like, I couldn't even leave it out. I had a whole other lecture waiting for me, though. He even made it a rule that I was never allowed to visit any of his friends' homes. Because, in his opinion, people are unreliable. However, he could invite friends, anytime he wanted to. When his friends visited, they would gather in the kitchen to sip coffee and chat as if they owned the place. In the meantime, it was too risky for me to even invite my friends to hang out at the mall. I would be tempted to make a mistake. For example, how paranoid must one be to believe that a child visiting a shopping centre is begging for trouble? Attending a small gathering, such as a friend's birthday celebration. Don't think about it. When my classmates talked about the parties they attended, I would have to come up with an explanation for not being able to attend. I was unable to inform them that my father had a strict restriction prohibiting me from going out to social gatherings. I was not even permitted to attend school events, such as athletic events or dances. I didn't go out, and everyone assumed I was simply the strange child. But they didn't realize it was because my dad was doing a control experiment on me. "Mom, you know how your dad is," she said, as though that clarified everything for her. It was my responsibility to abide by his laws. No inquiries were made. "Don't disturb him," she would reply whenever I ever pushed back or attempted to find out why he was acting this way. "It's not worthwhile." In retrospect, I believe she was genuinely terrified of him as well. But that didn't make things any easier for me. Instead of defending me or even challenging his absurd regulations, she decided to support him. Thus, I found myself confined in a home where everything I did was either closely watched, managed, or stopped entirely. I would witness other children at school becoming thrilled about growing up, receiving their first phones, attending sleepovers, and other such activities. That was not permitted. My dad would go on a tirade about how I didn't need a phone, and that if I was destined to have one, he would let me know if I even mentioned having one. My independence was a real threat to him. The feeling of isolation is beyond words. I was the only person I knew who was unable to leave the house after school without being interrogated as if I had broken the law. I would occasionally remain late at school to gain some peace of mind, justifying it to my parents as extra study time. In order to avoid difficulties, knowing that I would have to return home and cope with whatever new rule my dad had come up with that day, made me feel a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. There was no way out, and it seemed like I was in a jail with my own parents as the guards. I had had enough by the time I was a couple years away from becoming 18. I was aware that I would go as soon as I was given the legal right to make my own decisions. Don't turn around. I didn't fight and kept my head down. I just took the necessary action to prevent more mental anguish. I had already begun to count down the weeks and months until I could go without their consent. I wasn't only trying to find a way out, I was getting ready for it. I would observe how others responded to the situation. To be prepared, I made mental notes about how to handle life. Since my dad had made it plain that he would not assist me in any way, I was left to fend for myself. My life was like that. I was waiting, surviving, and making plans for the day I would be able to go and never return. I believed that things may improve for me when I eventually secured a part-time job while I was still in high school. The food shop was located next to the school, just cleaning, ringing up customers, and stocking shelves, nothing fancy. It was my own gig, though the manager appeared to be a kind man. I was thrilled that the hours accommodated my academic schedule. This work seemed like the first genuine freedom I had ever had at the age of 16. The notion of earning money on my own. The one freedom I'd had in years was something I could truly manage. Naturally, though, independence was taken away from me before I had even received my first paycheck the moment my dad learned of it. He asked me about it one day, and I recall it. He had a tendency of asking questions that were more set up than actual inquiries. He would wait for me to respond before interrupting to make me feel as like I was somehow at fault. He goes, while seated at the kitchen table, I quote, "We heard that you found employment." I should have realized at that moment that things would not work out, but I was too gullible to believe that he would be proud of me or anything. I told him everything, hoping for a nice career, perhaps. Or a nod, anyhow. He strikes me with instead. That being said, I hope you intend to make a contribution to the household. He was implying that he expected me to give him every single dime I earned. He refused to listen to me when I attempted to explain that I wanted to save money for education, and perhaps even for myself. He genuinely chuckled, as if it were a joke that I would keep my own salary. "Everything you earn goes to this family as long as you live under my roof," he stated to him. I owed him all I owned just because I lived there, when I eventually received my first paycheck. I recall feeling a strange mixture of pride and fear as I held it in my palm. On the one hand, I merited it. However, I was aware that it wasn't truly mine. My dad was prepared to accept it, hand extended as soon as I went through the door. Just expect me to fork it out, with no conversation or inquiries. How might I proceed? I gave it over because I didn't want to wind up on the streets. But I was mad, Guy. I put a lot of effort into my job. Additionally, I continued to be treated like a child and had no control over my life. I was just learning that I was a walking wallet to my dad, despite his claims that he was teaching me responsibility. Naturally, my mother supported him. She would say things like, "We're a family," or "Your dad knows best." We all contribute. However, I knew it had nothing to do with the family. It has to do with control. They would at least allow me to save something if they truly wanted to assist me or teach me anything. However, no. All the money went directly to them. My dad would shut me down when I attempted to ask if I may retain a small amount, claiming that it was selfish to hoard money when the family needed it. I needed it. They were all okay. There were no exceptional requirements or crises. He just took my money for no other reason. He even made an effort to give the impression that he was helping me by allowing me to remain there while I worked, as if I owed him my whole salary for staying at home. I would hear my co-workers discussing the items they were saving for. One was purchasing a vehicle, another had a trip planned. I was giving away every dime, yet I couldn't even purchase a snack for myself without getting permission. On one occasion, I received a little rise. It was only a few additional dollars each hour, nothing major. But that was a huge issue to me. Since I knew it wouldn't affect my parents, I didn't even inform them. Nevertheless, my dad discovered it. He was always prying into my belongings, and if I had accidentally left them out, reading my pay stubs. He went on to say how fortunate I was to be able to donate more after noticing that I was earning a bit more. In fact, he treated my rise as a luxury and expected me to be appreciative. The worst thing was that he would guilt-trip me if I mentioned wanting to save money or needed it for something. "Oh, so you think you don't need this family anymore?" he would ask. "You really believe you can achieve everything you want?" It was the ultimate deception. He would fabricate things to make it appear as though my desire for some freedom was selfish, as though it were a great betrayal to keep even one dime for myself. After a while, I simply stopped mentioning it. I would silently turn in my paycheck, keep my head down, and resume my job. Every shift seemed heavier since I was essentially working for nothing and knew that no matter how many hours I worked, I would never see a dime of it. I kept telling myself to wait until I was 18, just a bit longer. However, it was difficult. I was putting in all the hours and doing all the effort, yet I was receiving no results at all. I once attempted hiding some money because I was so angry. Perhaps they wouldn't notice if I tucked away a little each week, I reasoned. I so began storing some in an old book beneath my bed. I wanted anything that was mine, but I had no idea what I would do with it. For a few weeks, I kept it a secret while sometimes contributing a few dollars. However, my dad was waiting for me with that book in his hand when I got home one day. He had discovered the cash. He didn't shout. He didn't even appear angry. Rather, he gave me this arrogant look and said, "You think you're smart, don't you?" Then, without saying another word, he snatched every money I had concealed and left. I was devastated. The only freedom I believed I had was that small stockpile. It vanished in an instant. He seemed to need to tell me that he would always be in charge regardless of what I did. I stopped trying to save after that. I was sick of squabbling over leftovers, weary of being watched all the time. I'm sick of being viewed as my sole value. That's what I could give. I simply kept my head down, completed my duties, and silently turned in the paychecks. I was keeping track of the days till I was free. However, each day seemed to drag on forever. The work that was meant to help me become independent turned into yet another chain. My dad also had influence over another item. I had no choice but to wait. I'm hoping to eventually keep everything I've worked so hard to get. It felt like I had finally crossed the finish line of a marathon I had been running my entire life when I turned 18. I had been promising myself for years that I would permanently leave my parents' home once I reached that age. And now, everything was really taking place. As I dealt with my dad, worked long hours at that grocery store, took my money, and saw every cent leave my hands, I had been working continuously. However, I now had enough saved up to act at last. I had managed to save up enough money for a down payment on a little dilapidated room that was everything from opulent. It was mine, though. I wasn't particular. All I wanted was to get out. It felt strangely pleasant to pack away my belongings. At first, my parents didn't give it any thought. They assumed that I would remain there indefinitely, too scared to escape their hold. However, my dad looked as like he couldn't believe it when they understood that I was serious about moving Dot and my mother. "You think you're ready to be on your own?" she said as she stood there. Her voice, however, was unconcerned and uncaring. She seemed to be hoping that I would fail so that I would return with a stutter. My dad called me into the living room the night before I went. He put on his serious face and began to talk about how I wasn't ready and that it would be difficult to be out there. He persisted in telling me that I would return quickly and that I would never be able to make it on my own. It was his attempt to sow doubt and cause me to question my own judgment. To be honest, I was a little afraid. Much though I knew it would be difficult, staying seemed much worse. I woke up the following morning, tossed my luggage over my shoulder, and left without turning around. It seemed unreal. The fact that my abode was only a tiny, drafty room in an ancient house didn't even bother me. All that mattered was that it was mine. Even though there was only a mattress and an old dresser inside, I recall feeling a sense of freedom I had never had before as I sat down on the bed and looked about. No one was going to steal my money or tell me what to do. My life alone was somewhat difficult at first. I was struggling to make ends meet, broke. There wasn't much in my room. Just a sink in the corner and a hot plate I bought used. No fancy furnishings or refrigerator. I ate whatever I could afford, which was generally canned goods or ramen, but I didn't mind. At last, I was able to make my own decisions, even if it meant learning how to plan meals and create a budget. The fact that I was no longer working only to turn it all in made it all worthwhile. Enrolling in college was among my initial actions. Apart from escaping my parents, I hadn't given much consideration to my future, but now that I was free, I wanted more. I enrolled in school, sought for financial help, and took out some loans. I decided to major in business administration because I thought it would help me in the future. It seemed like a step forward, but it wasn't some ideal program. As if I were at last creating something of my own. It wasn't easy juggling employment and school. I would still have to fit in study sessions in between my lengthy grocery store hours. There was a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before, even though I usually came home fatigued. I wasn't only alive or existing because of someone else. I was putting effort into creating a future that belonged to me. And despite the fact that the battle was genuine, I continued because of that notion. I eventually began making friends at school. For the first time, I was surrounded by individuals who genuinely respected me. Not those who are waiting to regulate my every action or pass judgment. I no longer needed to constantly watch my back, wondering what my mother might say or how my father would respond. I was allowed to be who I was, and they accepted that. I felt as like I was finally becoming my own person, even though it was a minor thing. Occasionally, I would receive a message from my mother or a check-in from my father. They were mostly simply trying to find out how I was doing. In order to jump in and say, "See, we told you so," I understood they wanted me to ignore the fact that I was having difficulties. However, I didn't give them the joy of knowing anything about my life, so I kept it vague. I had no intention of providing them with ammunition to use against me. I eventually found a better-paying job waiting tables at a finer establishment. After leaving the grocery shop, I poured myself into juggling my new work and my studies. Although stressful, working in a restaurant was somewhat fulfilling. I was acquiring new abilities, developing my ability to deal with a variety of individuals, and increasing my monthly savings. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was going to lose everything when I considered things like purchasing nice clothes or remodeling my room. It felt nice, but the process was gradual. I had a rigorous schedule, studying late into the night, working in the day, and attending classes in the morning. Even though I could hardly keep my eyes open on certain nights, I felt like I was finally living. I was free to make mistakes, grow from them, and do my own thing without anyone telling me what to do. That independence was new to me, and I wasn't going to take it for granted. I was able to move into a little nicer apartment one day after months of saving. Although it was still only a little studio, it did have a bathroom and a proper kitchen, as well as enough area for a couch and a small table. It seemed as though a burden had been removed from my shoulders when I moved in. I accomplished this on my own, which demonstrated that I could exist without my parents' assistance or consent. As time passed, I also began to do better in my studies. I was able to concentrate and get good grades without the burden of my home life. Although I never considered myself to be very intelligent, my determination was enough to keep me going. I discovered that I was genuinely liking several of the courses, such as management and marketing. I felt as though my entire existence had been put on hold, and now I was at last hitting the play button. After a tough day, Knowing that I made it on my own terms makes me feel pleased when I return to my small studio. Although it was difficult, I was leading a life that was exclusively mine. I had no one to tell me what to do or where to go. Additionally, every small triumph seemed like a victory, whether it was passing an exam or saving money for a new piece of furniture. I was finally living the life I had dreamed about for so many years. Yes, it was difficult. I was usually tired and had little money. However, I would much rather live there than in my parents' home once more. It was like leaving a jail when I finally found myself. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could truly be joyful after being imprisoned. For me, things were at last beginning to make sense. I lived alone. I was earning enough money to support myself, and I was doing okay in school. Every small victory served as a reminder that leaving my parents' home was the finest choice I had ever made, and I felt as though my life was truly mine. I believed I was done with them. I got home one day from a hard work day to see a tiny gift at my door. I was a little curious because there was no return address and I wasn't expecting anything. There was a large package inside when I opened it. I thought it may be some paperwork for my job or college, but I was a little saddened to see who it was from. My dad gave it to me. Now, ever since I left, my parents hadn't exactly been assaulting my phone. Sometimes they would attempt to contact or text me, usually to guilt-trip me into going over for family matters or to ask me meaningless questions. However, I had never really shared much about my life with them, so I had kept things brief and to the point. It was strange to see an entire envelope from them. When I opened it, I found a letter from my father and several other documents. My stomach began to sink with each line of the letter as I began to read it. In essence, the letter said that my dad had started a business a few years prior and had taken out a sizable debt. In summary, the entire endeavour had failed miserably. He wanted my assistance to pay off his mounting debt. It wasn't even the worst part, though. A copy of the loan statement, which showed how much he owed, and it wasn't a little amount, was sent with the letter. It was enormous. I'm referring to years of payments, accrued interest, and an unclear path out. Because family ties together, my dad's message gave the impression that he was casually passing information along to me, as though it were my duty to assist him. Everything about it seemed unreal. They were simply waiting for me to come in and save the day after I had put so much effort into escaping them and creating something for myself. I felt a mixture of resentment and betrayal, as if they had carelessly dumped their filth on my doorstep. I recall trying to make sense of the loan documents while I sat there looking at them. They weren't requesting a one-time payment or a little loan. You're doing well today, so why don't you take over this enormous debt that we can't pay? That's what they were saying. In fact, my dad stated that since I was now earning a respectable living, it wouldn't be too much of a strain on me. How entitled can you become, really? I made the decision that I would not ignore this. In an attempt to remain composed, I contacted my dad and asked him directly what this was all about because I needed answers. He began his speech by saying that he had always had faith in me and knew I would succeed. It was now time for me to assist the family. What I was hearing was unbelievable. This guy was now acting as though I owed him my success after stealing every penny I made in high school and never giving me $1 for college. I informed him that this debt was his obligation, not mine, and that I had earned everything on my own. However, he dismissed it, stating that without me, you wouldn't be where you are now. He even had the audacity to claim that he was responsible for my independence, career, and whole existence. In an attempt to guilt-trip me about how difficult things had been for them recently, my mother also spoke out. She stated it was only right that I step up and assist because I was doing so well. She talked endlessly about family responsibilities and how they had helped me so much over the years. It was crazy. They truly believed that I could be blamed for everything, as if I owed them a great deal for allowing me to grow up in their home. My dad eventually acknowledged that it was some ill-conceived business plan when I questioned him what precisely he had been doing that had gotten him into this predicament. He threw everything into it because he believed he had discovered the next great thing, but it failed almost instantly. When things first went wrong, he didn't tell me about it and didn't ask for guidance or assistance. But now that I had a mountain of debt, it was all my fault. Then, to further twist the knife, he informed me that I was the only person qualified to do this duty because of my circumstances. I suppose he thought of me as his backup plan since he knew I was doing well for myself. Like, I'd somehow earned the privilege of paying off his screw-up since I'd gotten out of their grasp. I was so furious that I was having trouble speaking clearly. I assured him that I owed them nothing and that I had no responsibility for this. Without a shred of assistance from them, I created my life on my own. However, my father only chuckled and said that I would ultimately get over this, as if it were a phase I would someday outgrow. I felt like I'd been struck by a truck as I hung up. They believed that because it was the family's custom, I could suddenly pay off a pile of debt when I was working hard and barely making ends meet. I was shocked that they even dared to inquire. They didn't seem to have merely gone too far. For a few days, they had completely destroyed it. I made an effort to shrug it off, but it persisted. I couldn't stop thinking about their entitlement and how they believed I had put my life on wait to tidy up their mess. They seemed to view me as a contingency plan. Like every time they made a mistake, I was there to save them. My anger increased as I gave it more attention. This was not a one-time error. In fact, they thought they were worthy of my assistance, regardless of what they had done to me in the past. I made the decision to reply to them after a week or so. I was as direct as I could be in my letter, telling them that I would not be assisting them and that their debt was not my concern. I informed them that I was done allowing them to guilt-trip me and that they had never helped me, not even to pay for my rent or education. I told them that they would have to work their way out of this situation on their own and that this was the last time I would consider their demands for money. My dad contacted me the day they received the letter. He became enraged and said that I was unappreciative and that he had brought me up better than this. I no longer cared that he insisted that I was abandoning the family. I was not going to allow them to bring me down with them because I had done enough and endured enough. It was like tearing off a band-aid to end the call. I had had enough of their entitlement, deception, and guilt trips. I was prioritizing myself for once, and it felt great. I knew it was over after that final call. They didn't need to make me go on any more guilt trips or have deceptive family conversations. It was time to permanently cut them off. I had waited years for some sort of recognition or support, but this entire loan situation made it obvious that they simply considered me as a contingency plan, someone they could turn to in case things didn't work out. To them, I was only a living bank, not a human being. I ignored their messages and put my phone on mute for the following 2 weeks. They would leave voicemails, text, phone, or occasionally both. Sometimes it's simply my mother attempting to talk sense into my head. It was the same in all the messages. Cautions that I would regret not stepping up and reminders of my family responsibilities. My father used to say things like, "We raised you better than this and family is all we have." They seemed to be reading from a script, as though by saying the same lines over and over again, I would eventually give in. Initially, whenever I viewed one of these messages, I would experience an instinctive emotion, such as a surge of shame or rage. I suppose years of conditioning. Eventually, though, the messages simply became background noise. When I saw them, I would disregard them and get on with my day. It seemed strangely liberating. I wasn't feeling pressured to answer or provide an explanation for once. I was at last learning to be indifferent. Naturally, though, they continued. As I had anticipated, my dad became more irate. He said on his message that if I didn't answer, he would have to take serious steps. I removed it. He then attempted to write a letter stating that if necessary, he would get in touch with my friends or co-workers. I was a little annoyed by that one, but that was just another one of his fear tactics, I told myself. As usual, he was bluffing and attempting to trick me, nor were they limited to direct messages. My mum began acting like a worried mother by contacting my siblings to inquire whether they had heard from me, claiming to be really anxious. But they were familiar with the routine. The first person to phone me and warn me to ignore her was my brother, who had been sick of them for years. He said that the main reason she's scared now is that she can't control you. That essentially encapsulated it. My parents were more concerned with what I could accomplish for them than they were with me. I eventually came to the conclusion that formalizing it was the only way to actually eliminate their influence. I thus requested a restraining order. It felt like the only way to get them to permanently back off, even though I didn't want to do it. I was able to have the order authorized because I had preserved all of their threats and guilt-tripping texts. I felt as though a tremendous burden had been lifted when I received the message. They were no longer free to enter my life whenever they pleased. It was a fascinating fallout. Naturally, my father was incensed. He called me ungrateful and said I was abandoning my own family in the last communication I received from him. I had heard it all before, though. By now, I was beyond the influence of their remarks. I had been under control my entire life, but now I was at last free. At first, going without contact seemed strange. They had been in my ear all the while, telling me what I could and couldn't do, and I had become so accustomed to it. It was the most serene stillness I had ever experienced, yet it also felt odd. I wasn't waiting for the next demand, the next lecture, or the next shoe to drop with that unrelenting knot of fear in my gut for the first time. Without their shadow looming over me, I could truly concentrate on living my own life. I gradually began discovering more about myself. I could finally make my own decisions without feeling bad or second-guessing everything since my parents weren't always meddling. I began focusing my efforts on things that truly important to me, such as my work, my education, and creating a life that was truly mine. At first, the independence seemed odd. It was almost as like I was unsure of how to utilize it. But as time went on, I began to feel like a genuine person rather than only a resource or tool for my parents. Of course, not everyone comprehended the concept of going without touch. Some of my friends didn't understand why I couldn't just make up with my parents, or they felt that I was going too far. "But they're your family," they would remark. Or perhaps it wasn't how they meant it. They didn't know the whole story, so I would just nod and let them speak. The majority of people were unaware of what it was like to live under a dictatorship masquerading as a family, where everyone could take advantage of you if it suited them. I was even told to simply forgive and move on by a co-worker once. I recall thinking, if only you knew, as I stared at him. People who have loving families will never know what it's like to have people who are meant to protect you also break you down all the time. I wasn't resentful. I had just finished. The tranquility I experienced began to develop into something unexpected as more time went by. Self-assurance. I had to fully trust myself after cutting my parents off, to rely on my own judgment without having someone dictate to me. I began to make decisions based on my desires rather than what other people thought I should do. Under their control, I would not have been able to save money, plan travels, or invest in myself. I occasionally feel anxious, wondering if they will somehow return and ruin my life. However, I would then tell myself that I had taken precautions and that I had maintained my position. They were no longer able to touch me, and I felt secure in my own life for the first time. Now that I look back, I have no regrets. It was difficult to avoid touch, but it was essential. My parents had a history of taking. They're constantly trying to find something for me. They never took into account what I needed. Family was simply another word for duty. However, I believe that family should be about providing support, respect, and trust, things I never received from them. Retaliation or getting even was not the reason I cut them off. It was a matter of survival, about, for once, picking myself. Rather than continuously putting my health at risk for indifferent individuals, I eventually discovered that I owed them nothing, although it took a while. They made the decision to turn me into a pawn in their scheme, and I decided to quit. Thus, here I am, creating my life as I see fit, free from their meddling, and I genuinely feel stronger and happier as a result. Although they are your parents, I am aware that there will always be others who don't get it and will say things like that. However, they weren't my parents, not in any significant way, and I've finally realized that I'm worthy of better. Story 3. My 4-year girlfriend turned down my proposal. Initially, I felt ashamed. However, I sent my lover to the streets where she belonged, once my sister revealed some girl code. Okay, it's here. My age is 27. Part of the reason I'm telling this is to get it off my chest. And partly because, yes, I'm still in disbelief about the outcome. For 4 years, I'd been dating Liz, a 26-year-old woman. When you're with someone you know, 4 years is a long time. I genuinely believed she was the one. It was a buddy who introduced us, and to be honest, we clicked immediately. It was easy and enjoyable. We could converse for hours on end and never grow bored. Finding someone who simply understands you in that way is difficult. My relatives. They cherished her. My mother would often inquire about her. Even my siblings got along with her, and my dad thought she was fantastic. Liz was more than simply my partner. In a sense, she was already a member of the family. It was reciprocal as well. Her parents and even her younger brother, with whom I occasionally hung out when we were all together, got along incredibly well with me. You know, I suppose a part of me thought we were halfway to being a family, like it was only a question of formalizing it. We had discussed marriage, children, the future, and everything else. Every time we discussed it, Liz would become excited and begin to see our wedding, the type of home we would live in, and the number of children we would have. Furthermore, they weren't just hazy daydreams. In fact, we had become very specific, sometimes even down to our ideal residence, and even speculating about possible names for future children. So yes, I believed that we were solid. All of this, I suppose, is why I never gave our current situation any thought. It appeared like we were in agreement. Definitely. And when you're that certain about someone, you begin to consider what to do next. I thus made the decision to pop the question to her some 6 months ago. I began saving money, researching rings, and determining how I might make it unique. To get her thrilled, I gave her tiny clues here and there for months. I wanted her to know that something significant was about to happen, but I also didn't want to reveal the entire plot. She would chuckle and respond, "I'm already stuck with you, dummy," when I made a joke about her ultimately being stuck with me forever. I interpreted that favorably. Let's go back to last weekend. You do realize that I had been preparing this for months. For a weekend retreat, I reserved this lovely resort, something a little expensive and really comfortable. Making it a memory she would never forget was the goal. I planned out the entire evening and had the ring ready to go. Private meal. Take a look at the artwork. We would be alone beneath the sky. After that, I would propose to her by getting down on one knee. It seemed like the ideal strategy. When we arrive at the resort, everything is operating as it should. Both of us are enjoying our time away and are in a good mood. And this is it, I thought to myself. Now is the time when I will finally make it happen. I was both tremendously excited and really scared about the build-up. We have supper that evening. I had reserved a little secluded area where we could enjoy a glimpse of the lake from this balcony. It was beautifully adorned with lights and candles. I imagined she would be ecstatic since it was one of those scenes you see in romantic comedies. Dinner is a huge success. We're talking, laughing, and remembering the past. She tells me a tale about being lost in her hometown, and we both start laughing at that moment. This is why I want to live my entire life with her, I thought. She's witty, she's nice. You know, there's something about her that just makes life feel a little bit better. After dessert, I feel like I can finally... Okay, here is the moment. I take the ring out of my pocket and begin reciting all of the lines I've practiced many times in my mind. For example, how important she is to me. How my life wouldn't be the same without her. And the typical cheesy things. I then ask them to marry me. Now I was hoping for a few tears of joy. Absolutely. Perhaps a little bouncing up and down as in those movies of proposals. She simply freezes, though, as if she were a deer caught in headlights, a little taken aback. After what seems like an eternity, she just looks at me and I can feel my stomach sink. At last, she speaks, but it's not a yes. Can we hold off for a few more months? To be honest, I was at a loss for words. I sat there in a state of shock. A few of months. I had assumed that we were already in agreement, but it turns out that I had misjudged the issue entirely. She continues to attempt to clarify that she wants more time to be certain and that she is not rejecting me in any way. She said that she wanted everything to feel ideal and that she just wasn't in the correct frame of mind at the time. This is still a yes, she insisted. Just yet, it's not a formal yes. However, that didn't improve my mood. I simply put myself out there and got a response. Not quite yet. I faked a grin, nodded in agreement, and attempted to preserve my composure. But I was heartbroken on the inside. I was expecting this to be a momentous occasion that would change my life, but instead I was left with a gigantic question mark hovering over my head. I thought all of this had been for naught. As the evening came to a conclusion, she continued to attempt to comfort me, saying things like, "I want this and I love you, but I just need a little more time to make sure I'm ready." I wanted to trust her, really. I truly did. But when you've just risked everything and the person you love essentially says they don't trust you, it's difficult to remain hopeful. I hardly slept at all that night. I began going over everything again in my mind, wondering whether I had hurried things or if there were any indicators I had missed. From my vantage point, everything appeared to be ideal, but perhaps I hadn't taken her cues seriously or something. I felt like I was floating about feeling foolish, as if I had been living in a bubble that quote how the flawless proposal that I had been working on for months came to be. Things were strange between us following that uncomfortable, unpleasant evening. She didn't exactly turn me down after all. However, you don't want to hear that she needs a few more months. When you're holding a ring while on your knees. We left the resort early the following morning, and the trip home was silent and stressful. Although neither of us wanted to be the first to bring it up, I believe we were both attempting to comprehend what had transpired. "What do you mean that you need more time?" I wanted to know. However, I was concerned by her words. To be honest, I was still ashamed and unsure of my ability to cope with more disappointment. She apologized again when we arrived home. She would say things like, "You know, I love you. To be certain, I simply need a bit more time." She seemed to be adding salt to a wound each time she uttered it. I understand that making significant decisions can cause anxiety, but this was something we were both meant to desire. She had been acting as though she wasn't sure we were headed in the same direction for years. She said that she needed to be in the proper frame of mind as she continued to try to explain herself. To be honest, it was unclear. For example, what exactly does mental space entail in this situation? She didn't give me the whole image, but it seemed like she was dancing about for some reason. I didn't want to hear an answer I wasn't prepared for, but I also wanted to ask her directly if there was anything else going on that would cause her to hesitate. I tried to seem understanding, so I simply nodded along and kept my lips shut. However, I was experiencing a variety of emotions, including fury, confusion, and sadness. Things seemed tense for the following few days. For a moment, she would pretend that nothing was wrong. The next time I saw her, she had this guilty look on her face, as if she realized she had harmed me. Indeed, she did. After something like that, it's difficult to just dismiss it and resume your daily life. She would tell me that she still thought we could be together and that she still envisioned a future together, but for some reason, it no longer felt genuine. It seems as though this ongoing uncertainty has taken the place of my original exhilaration. I continued going over the plan again in my mind, wondering whether I had made a mistake or miscalculated. Was I going too quickly? Did her signals go unnoticed by me? However, we had already discussed marriage several times. I was genuinely baffled by the changes. She then came home from work one evening and sat me down as if she had prepared a major speech. She began by stating that she needed a few more months to be fully prepared, as though time alone will magically transform her. "It's not you, it's me." And all that kind of nonsense was what she was repeating. Even her attempt to convince me that we were essentially engaged didn't set well with me. "Either you want to marry me or you don't," I informed her. This shouldn't be this difficult. However, she dismissed it, stating that she was confident in us. Just not at this moment. Tell me, how can anyone be okay with that? I imagined I would spend the rest of my life with this person whom I adore. Claiming that I'm insufficient to influence her decision, I became increasingly irritated since I thought she was letting me know if she wasn't ready yet. How could I be sure she would be prepared later? However, each time I attempted to bring this up, she would break down in tears and declare that she only needed my understanding and didn't want to lose me. I felt stuck as a result, trying to get answers while without aggravating her further. It was similar to treading carefully. I didn't want to risk alienating her further, but I also wanted to insist on further clarification. I reasoned that perhaps she simply needs some time. Perhaps she is truly overburdened and will soon change her mind. However, I could see that I was beginning to shut off my feelings. I began to back off in little ways because I didn't want to get wounded anymore. I would spend less time with her, avoid discussing the future at all, and keep discussions more superficial. I felt as though I was waiting for her to take the initiative or for her to respond directly, but nothing came of it. It was obvious to her that something was wrong. She also asked me whether I was upset with her one evening. I was inclined to respond, "Yeah, I am." However, I simply assured her that I was all right and shrugged. "I felt like I was drifting away," she said, continuing to push. "I don't know what you expect," I said to her. "I'm giving you the time you requested since you told me you needed it." She stopped talking after that, but I could see by the expression on her face that she understood precisely what I meant. I wasn't going to sit there and seem like everything was okay since she had put our relationship in a limbo. After that, there was this one night that seemed to be the tipping point. She took a seat next to me on the couch and began discussing this significant project at work. She said how anxious she was and how she wanted everything to calm down before she could give her all. She gave the impression that she was unable to accept the proposal because of work-related stress. I nodded along, even though it didn't make sense to me. She was clearly having difficulties, but if she truly loved me as she said, I couldn't see how that would have prevented her from wanting to marry me. I was becoming frustrated with the waiting game. Each day that passed. I could feel my distance from her growing. Our relationship seemed to be on a timer right now, and I was clueless about how much time was left. And I suppose I began to brace myself for the worst. What if she never feels ready? I began to wonder. It felt like I was left in the dark, waiting for her to figure out something I believed was already worked out. After years of investing in this relationship and believing we were moving toward the same destination, she insisted, however, that she simply needed time, as though that will solve all the problems. I continued to try to be understanding, but I was becoming impatient. At night, I would lie in bed and reflect on how only a week before, everything had been so ideal, and now it appeared as though I didn't even know the person sitting next to me. I hoped that everything would go back on track at this point, even though it was just a matter of time until I reached my breaking point. Okay, so at this point, Liz and I were in a limbo as we waited for her to make a commitment decision. To be honest, I was going crazy because I felt like I was receiving conflicting messages every single day. She would appear to be remote, as if she were in an other place, and then act as though everything was perfect, cuddling, and nice. Since I had no idea what to do with myself, I reasoned that talking to someone would be beneficial. However, I wasn't quite prepared to approach my parents or friends. Who wants to acknowledge that their 4-year girlfriend isn't sure about them? In the end, I spoke with my sister. My sister doesn't hold back, I can assure you of that. Although she is extremely insightful, she can be brutally rude at times. She doesn't sugarcoat things, and she has a talent for understanding people in circumstances. I explained everything to her, Liz claiming she needed more time, the uncomfortable trip back, and the proposal. Everything, and the response from my sister. She informs me right away that something is wrong. I mean, really off. She said that it didn't make sense for Liz to withdraw in this way after 4 years, especially because we had already discussed marriage so much, even if at first I felt she was being overly dramatic. "Has Liz been acting strange lately?" she inquired. Whether her conduct has changed in any way. "Not really," I said, so as not to come out as paranoid. My stomach dropped as my sister struck me with something. "Look what Liz did," she remarked. "When something else is happening, that's the quintessential feminine code. When a female abruptly changes her mind about accepting a proposal, it's typically because she wants to leave her options open and there's another person involved, and I was unwilling to accept it. We were talking about Liz, after all. I believed I knew her better than anyone, since we had been together for years. However, my sister persisted in suggesting that Liz may be already seeing someone else, or at least thinking about it, if she wanted time to make up her mind. I felt in my heart that there were minor details that hadn't lined up recently, but I dismissed them, telling myself I was overanalyzing the situation. This made my heart sink. My sister gave me a tale about a friend of hers who had a similar situation since she could tell I was having trouble understanding it. When she proposed to him, this friend's boyfriend had played the same "I need time" trick. He didn't want to end things until he was certain he wanted to stay with her. As it turned out, he was seeing someone else. Despite my desire to deny it, my sister cautioned me that I may be facing the same predicament. It struck too near home. She gave me advice when I asked her what I should do. It's simple. You must do some digging. Check to see if she is hiding another male. If she isn't being truthful with you, you don't deserve to be forced to play this guessing game. I was disgusted by the idea of prying into my own girlfriend's life. I never thought I'd end up like that. That guy who has to see how his spouse is doing since he's not sure if he can trust her. However, my sister was correct. I wanted a response of some sort. I had a right to know if Liz was hesitant because of another guy. I thus began to pay closer attention. I began to notice small details, but I wasn't doing anything insane like stalking her or looking through her phone. She might take longer than usual to go out for drinks with friends after work, or she would receive texts late at night and hold her phone a little closer than normal. I made an effort to avoid drawing conclusions too quickly, but as these small details accumulated, it seemed as though I was making connections on my own. Then one day she brought up this new co-worker who had recently joined her team. She lightly addressed him, saying he was pleasant and entertaining, but I could see her face light up a bit as she spoke about him. Despite my best efforts to remain calm, my mind was racing. I began to question whether this was the man my sister had been alerting me about. As much as I despised it, I was unable to stop myself from listening to my sister's voice in my thoughts, instructing me to pay attention and seek for the clues. I always wondered if Liz was with him when she went out. I used to wonder whether it was him every time she received a text, and smiled down at her phone. The suspicion was making me insane. But once the notion came to me, I was unable to think about it. I finally decided I'd had enough one evening. I had had enough of sitting around in quiet and allowing all of these uncertainties to consume me. I then questioned her informally about this co-worker. She immediately gave me this guarded expression as if I had caught her off guard, even though I tried to make it seem like I was simply inquisitive and trying to stay up to date with her life and friends. The way she responded seemed strange, but she dismissed it, claiming that they were just friends and that he was fine to hang out with. I realized then that my sister was most likely correct. Beyond that, the conversation stalled. She abruptly changed the topic, but I was already beginning to piece things together. There was too much that didn't make up, and perhaps I was making assumptions. She seemed to need time to determine whether she was ready to be with me, but she didn't appear to need time to hang out with this man from work, and I couldn't stop thinking about that. I felt trapped in this chaos, unsure of what was genuine and what wasn't, as my uncertainties evolved into something worse. This place made me feel ill. At this point, I wasn't even certain whether she shared my desire to spend the rest of my life with this individual. I began to feel resentful of myself, as well as her, for not recognizing it sooner, and for having so much faith in her that I disregarded all the warning signals until my sister had to essentially hit me with the reality. I sat by myself in our living room that evening, simply gazing at the wall and wondering what in the world I was meant to do. I hadn't discussed any of this directly with Liz. I was still holding out hope that she would confess without my having to press the issue. Now that everything was out in the open, though, I was unable to deny what I was witnessing. Although I lacked hard evidence, I had a gut feeling that she was hiding something from me. I was now trapped with this information, unsure of whether to approach her or wait for it to happen. I'm hoping she decides to be truthful. In any case, there was no turning back now that we were no longer together. Okay, so every time I see Liz, I can't help but think about my sister's remarks. As she continued to describe the female code, it became increasingly clear to me, and I found it impossible to ignore. Although I didn't want to think Liz would act in this way, everything she did seemed to confirm my suspicions once they were established. I knew I would lose my mind if I didn't find the answer. I needed to know the truth, but I never wanted to be that man who snoops. So I took her phone one night when she was sleeping. Even though I felt terrible, I had come to believe that I was only shielding myself from further harm. I tried not to wake her as I scanned through her texts, my heart racing the entire time. Then I noticed it. The man at her job sent her messages. It initially appeared harmless enough, like cordial conversation between co-workers. However, as I continued to browse, things became dubious. A couple of the late-night communications seemed much too flirtatious to be sent between pals. After a work trip, he texted her, "Miss you." She had responded, "Me too," after they had continued together. That's when I realized, after all, until there's something more going on, you don't tell someone you miss them, do you? That night, I kept quiet with her. After returning her phone, I lay there feeling nauseous and stared at the ceiling. I didn't get any sleep. I had a hard time looking at her the next morning. She was cheerful and pretended that nothing was wrong, discussing what she had planned for the day, and I simply sat there feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. The worst thing, I didn't even know she knew. I was aware that she continued to act as though nothing was wrong, as though we were still a couple preparing for the future. As I watched her, I wondered whether she was acting. I became annoyed by everything she did, no matter how small. I would begin to reflect after she told me about her day. Do you actually spend time with him, or are you only at work? It was wearing me down. I was unable to handle this any longer after a few days. I asked her directly, "Do you still think well of me? For example, are you certain that you have no interest in other people?" She was surprised, as if I had just made a baseless accusation against her. "I am, of course," she said. "Why even ask that question?" However, I observed how protective she became, as if she had something to hide, and her expression dramatically altered when I brought up the man from work. She became really agitated. I wasn't believing it when she stammered out that she didn't want me to worry because he was only a buddy. I told her that I felt as like I didn't even know her anymore, that I'd seen the messages, and that I knew she had been speaking to him late at night. She made an effort to dismiss it, claiming that she never really did anything with him and that it was just harmless fun. Her justifications were becoming fewer and fewer, despite her repeated claims that they were only friends and that she would never violate any boundaries. Then she gave me the worst line to date. I simply didn't understand. I wasn't sure if I was prepared for marriage. And I don't know, he was. A diversion? A diversion. I was only that to her now. While she determined whether this person at work was a better fit, she had several options on the side. I'd been with this woman for 4 years, and all of a sudden I was just the safe option as she made out with a co-worker. In addition to being incensed, I felt absolutely devastated. I had been making plans for the future with her, only to discover that she had been hesitant the entire time. She made an effort to apologize, claiming that she had just been speaking to him because she was hesitant about us and that it wasn't serious. She continued stating she was perplexed and didn't want to harm me when I informed her that she should have been discussing it with me rather than some other person, which, to be honest, didn't make any sense. In an attempt to decompress, I took a drive outside the apartment since I wanted a break. I couldn't stop wondering how it had come to this. How could someone who appeared to be so dedicated just decide to change? And all because she was unwilling to tell me the truth. My sister was correct in her warning. Liz was holding off on making a decision until she was certain that this person was worth it. What's the worst? I was the fallback option. Liz was waiting for me, looking glum, when I returned from my drive. She had been sobbing, but I felt numb rather than sorry for her. She repeatedly apologized, said she recognized she had made a mistake and pleaded with me to understand. In an attempt to persuade me that she was prepared to commit, she pledged to end her relationship with him and concentrate on us. However, how could I be expected to believe her? Every pledge she made seemed insincere. I told her I needed time to ponder since I was at a loss for words. I then went to bed. I was too exhausted to give a damn, but I could hear her sobbing in the adjacent room. I wondered whether I would ever be able to trust her again as I lay there looking up at the ceiling. What I had just learned clouded every recollection I had of our connection. I kept wondering whether I had been a fool all along for seeing this ideal future with someone who wasn't even certain about me. Liz was all over me the next morning, attempting to patch things up. I felt as like I was staring at a stranger while she prepared breakfast, continued to embrace me, and assured me that she would remedy this. Even if she insisted she hadn't done anything, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that she had already betrayed me. I felt totally supplanted in her life, and emotional and physical infidelity is still cheating. Throughout the day, she texted me repeatedly, telling me in lengthy texts that she would make amends and sever her relationship with the man. However, it was too late. I had already begun to distance myself. I walled off my affections for her little by bit. No amount of apologies can mend the rift that results from the breach of that trust. She sat down with me that evening and made a firm commitment to prove herself to me, to permanently break off communication with him, and to be completely ready for me. I couldn't get rid of the impression that I was merely her fallback, the safe alternative she would stick with while her other options failed, even though she appeared distraught and had tears in her eyes. Knowing that no matter what she said, things would never be the same, I sat there looking at her with a mixture of despair and rage. Therefore, things did not suddenly improve when all was revealed. I wish I could claim that her apologies and assurances improved my mood, but they didn't. I knew she was making an effort. Indeed, I was unable to get over the incident, even though she stopped contacting that guy and was all about proving her commitment to me. I had the impression that she had retained me as a fallback option every time I glanced at her. What she said was irrelevant. The trust was gone now, and I wasn't sure if I would ever regain it. Then the unexpected part arrived. I believe things were finally settling down around 2 weeks following her sad revelation. I was letting her prove herself, but I was still not sure. That's what I kept telling myself anyhow. Then one evening, she arrived home looking utterly enraged. She abruptly said that he was cheating on me too after tossing her bag on the table and not even glancing at me. I was at a loss for words. The room fell silent, as if the irony had struck us both in the face. It turns out that while he was playing with her, she had been chatting to one of her friends who also worked with that person, and they had said that he had been dating someone else. Despite seeing the anguish and rage in her eyes, I felt nothing except indifference. She was sobbing and unhappy because she had done the same thing to me with her side fling. It was absolutely absurd all around. She began to yell about how ashamed she was and how she couldn't believe he had betrayed her. She also said he was a liar. Yeah, welcome to the club, was all I could think. At last, she turned to face me, expecting me to say something, perhaps to console her, but I simply sat there, wondering whether she really understood the irony of it all. Then she became silent, as if she was now realizing how twisted up everything was. "I'm sorry," she added after taking a big breath and sitting down across from me. Actually, I had no idea what I was contemplating. Never should I have. I should never have questioned our possessions. Then she did what I was afraid of. She requested that I give her another genuine opportunity. She desired a fresh start, wanted me to pop the question to her once more. This time she will give it her all. I believe she honestly believed that would resolve the issue, that everything would miraculously be okay if we simply hit reset. I had already checked out, though. At that point, her words were simply noise, and I believe she could see it in my face. "You've already made up your mind," I told her. "You returned to me after he let you down because you wanted him. Liz, I'm no consolation prize. When you're unsure, you can't just ignore me and then return at your convenience." She said she didn't mean it that way and began to cry once again, because she just became entangled in something she didn't comprehend. However, I was finished. I told her that I couldn't live my entire life with someone who didn't trust me. If I'm not sufficient for you at this time, I will never be. In an attempt to persuade me that she was at last certain she had erred, she pleaded. However, I refused to accept it. I was unable to believe anything she said. I was unable to ignore the fact that she had revealed her true nature to me. I resisted her attempt to embrace me, which caused her to get irate. She began criticizing me of giving up too easily, claiming that I was discarding all we had worked so hard to achieve because of a single error. I became even more irate when she attempted to guilt-trip me by telling me that I should at least defend us. You are the one who threw us away because you couldn't even determine if you wanted to be with me or another guy, I informed her. I won't wait around for you to decide that I'm sufficient. She didn't have anything to say in response, but I could see her becoming defensive. Rather of simply owning up to her mistakes, she attempted to blame me as well, as if I were the villain for not wanting to stay and support her. I informed her that it was over. I requested that she get her belongings and depart. She gave me a startled face as if I had just smacked her, as if she had never imagined that I would truly break up with her. She broke down in tears and said she had nowhere to go. She said she didn't believe I would dump her, but I was done. You may either find another place or remain with your friend, I informed her. I will not sit here and act as though nothing is wrong. I'm making my own decisions. You made yours. She sobbed and pleaded with me to change my mind. However, I refused to back down. I refused to allow her to turn everything around and make me feel bad for finally defending myself. She eventually received the message. I just sat there feeling a strange mixture of relief and despair as she contacted a friend to come get her. Although I understood this was her own fault, I still felt sad for her. She picked up her luggage when her companion arrived, gave me a final glance and added, I hope you find someone who can make you happy. She then departed. As simple as that. For many years, lost. I was unsure about how to feel. I felt like I wanted to cry. However, another area experienced this peculiar liberty. It seemed as if I had regained control of my life. I erased all of our photos and banned her number after she left. I wanted no reminders of the mess she had created. It was painful, yes, but I also felt as though a burden had been lifted. She didn't appreciate me as much as I valued her, despite my long-held belief that she was the one. And even if I wanted to, I knew I couldn't go back. I've been analysing things for a few days now. I get upset with her sometimes. At other times I feel guilty for not realising sooner, but I know that this was the right choice. Instead of someone who needs to try things out before deciding to commit, I need someone who genuinely wants to be with me. That quote, how it ended then. Not with a great showdown or a dramatic farewell. Simply a silent, disorganised conclusion to what I had believed would be my future. I know I made the correct decision, even if it's not easy. Liz packed up and left about a month ago. Despite my best efforts to move on, I occasionally get information from common friends or those who are still in contact with her. The most recent. Karma apparently struck her hard when it returned. She attempted to remain with her buddy who had picked her up shortly after she left, but it didn't work out. At first, the buddy was patient enough to assist Liz, but the drama grew tiresome. Liz, I suppose, relied on her a bit too much, and her buddy had her own problems. After being fired, she wasn't going to continue to be Liz's backup plan indefinitely. Liz was forced to return to her parents' house after that. That didn't go well either, based on what I've heard. It turns out that when her parents learned what she had done, they were rather displeased. They didn't enjoy learning that she had ruined things with someone they believed would be a good fit for her, and they had liked me. They probably didn't want to cope with the aftermath after realising what a mess she had caused. She was urged to get our act together, but she was unable to provide a place to stay or demonstrate any actual learning. After a while, they informed her that she needed to move. She is essentially alone now and has nowhere to go. The man with whom she had flirted at work. He has already moved on and is already gone. Her buddy claims that she has attempted to get in touch with a few other individuals, but the most of them are over the drama and want to avoid her. She discovered the hard way that there are repercussions when you continue to treat people like alternatives. I have a small amount of sympathy for her, but not enough to do action. She made her decisions. She made the decision to discard all we have in order to pursue an obviously pointless goal. She now has to cope with the consequences. She had reportedly been moving around aimlessly in search of a place to crash. I won't lie either. Knowing that she is dealing with the fallout from her actions gives her a certain sense of satisfaction. Sometimes the way things turn out is humorous. I would have done anything for her a few months ago, but today I feel nothing. I just felt relieved that I was done with someone who didn't appreciate what we had before I wasted any more time on them. I'm not looking back, I'm pushing forward.